Hello and welcome to the Game Day podcast with me, Sam Matterface, talkSPORT's chief football correspondent Alex Crook and our European football expert Kevin Hatchard. Coming up on the show today, Manchester United hand Marcus Rashford a new 5-year deal. They get the deal done for Andre Onana and strip Harry Maguire of the captaincy. But what next for the England man? Will he go off to West Ham United? If Kane keeps his word, then he'll join us. That's the words of Uli Hoeneß, the Bayern Munich legend. Does that mean that Kane is on his way out of Tottenham? And Arsenal finally confirmed the signing of Declan Rice, Jurriën Timber to go with Kai Havertz. Have they had the best window so far of any of the Premier League clubs? And we'll continue our look ahead to the new season today. We're looking in particular at Fulham and Brighton. It's all on the Game Day podcast from talkSPORT. Maguire stripped of the captaincy, something that he revealed actually on social media. That was all a little bit unnecessary, I thought.
What, him revealing it or them taking the captaincy away?
It was a conversation that needed to happen. I don't think that if you're going to try and sell, which is what they're trying to do,
True.
Harry Maguire, you need to have a big furore, create attention, to have a massive debate about whether or not Harry Maguire's done this, Harry Maguire's done that. You're opening a can of worms over his performances, putting more pressure on him again. Probably, in a sense, turning the social media onto him once more when it was completely unnecessary. There's no way it needed to be revealed. There's no way it needed to come out now, because if he ends up moving, which is what Manchester United want, otherwise they wouldn't have done it, then he wouldn't be the captain anyway.
Well,
so no announcement is required.
I guess it's because they've got these games to play on their tour, and Maguire, even if he does feature, won't be wearing the armband. So I guess that's why it's come to a head now. But I make you right in one sense, because we know that if they were to sell at one stage this summer, United were looking to recoup £50 million of the $80 million they spent on Maguire. But by taking the captaincy away, as you say, making it clear he doesn't have a future at the football club, they've devalued the asset already, haven't they?
And one thing I will say is that Harry Maguire conducted himself brilliantly in his statement to supporters, suggesting, that he would do everything required, far from sort of saying he's throwing his toys out of his pram. And some people would have done that. Some people would have got rather irate and kicked up a fuss about it. He said he'll knuckle down and try and get his place back in the team.
Do you think he wrote that himself?
I think he wrote it himself, yeah. I think he was definitely part of the process. I'm not necessarily sure that he typed it out and put it on Twitter, but I definitely think he would have been part of the process. A genuine human being. This is a guy that's always been close to the supporters. Go back to 2018, those pictures of him standing against the rails, talking to friends and family. He was part of the England support that went to 2016 and cheered on his what would soon to be colleagues. Didn't know that at the time, but he was, he's very much a football man. Some people thought that the De Gea treatment was disrespectful. Others, like Crook, think that it's just been, quite ruthless. And Manchester United are finally turning into a club that are getting their ducks in a row. And when they don't want a player, instead of giving them an extra year or an extra couple of minutes in terms of playing time, just pulling the rug from beneath them and saying, no, clean break, time for us to move on. Is that how you see it?
I don't disagree with the sentiment from Ten Hag that De Gea isn't good enough to be a modern goalkeeper at a top club, and I think Onana certainly will improve the team. Obviously Mason Mount has come in, which was again a move heavily driven by Ten Hag. So I think what we're seeing this summer is the owners, and still the Glazers, despite the fact they put the club up for sale about 16 years ago, it seems.
It's funny how you keep
they're
turning
backing
around.
the manager.
Now you're like giving a big up to the Glazers. This morning
not at all.
You're saying they're doing a good job and they're turning them into a professionally well-run club.
I think Ten Hag is dragging United kicking and screaming.
It wasn't that long ago when you were describing Harry Maguire as a Rolls Royce of a defender.
Don't bring that up again.
Why? Did you not know this, Kev? He put a tweet out in August 2019 suggesting that I was wrong for describing him. He basically said during a pub discussion, we were having a pint watching a football match, he said, Harry Maguire is a Rolls Royce of a defender. Like he likes to do. He's big, strong, bold statements. Harry Maguire is a Rolls Royce of a defender. I said, he's not a Rolls Royce of a defender. He's a good defender. He's a Land Rover Discovery with all the extras, the little sat-nav and stuff like that.
I misspelt it. I meant Reliant Robin.
You said Rolls Royce. And now, 4 years later, he's
You
battering
shouldn't be working in papers with spelling like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I just said to him, you just got to temper your enthusiasm. Sometimes you just go too far that way, and then immediately something goes wrong, you go the other way. Just constantly U-churning. Just don't necessarily go so hard so early, and then you won't have to backtrack as much as you do.
No, I was wrong about
Where's
Maguire.
the fun in that?
I was wrong about Maguire, unfortunately. But back to the point, and there was a massive tangent. The ownership structure is still a mess.
Sorry.
There's still not a proper director of football at Old Trafford.
It's the Glazers'
But
fault.
luckily, they've stumbled upon a very good coach who is doing his best to pull it all together.
Well, you say stumbled, or did they change the structure behind the scenes and the new director of football and technical director identified that new manager, did an interview with him and thought that he was better placed than another manager that they also interviewed? Is that stumbling, or is that just good, diligent recruitment?
Was that your mate Darren Fletcher again who led that one?
Well, listen, he was definitely part of it, yeah, and I think he's done a very good job.
Yeah, no, I agree. But listen, we could do a whole podcast on Manchester United and the Glazers and the takeover.
Quick, move on. But
I'm pleased that Ten Hag is being backed, and I think he'll continue to be backed. I think there's still every chance that Rasmus Hojlund arrives, although the price tag does seem to have got ridiculous. And keep an eye on Sophie and Amrabat as well. I think he'd be a good addition.
It'd be nice for them to be backed rather than you being backed into a corner. Hojlund, how good is he, Kev?
Yeah, really good. I think it's interesting that Crookie says the price tag's ridiculous, because what the price tag is, I think, is a reflection of his value to Atalanta. They're not in a rush to get rid of him. Atalanta have danced this dance many, many times. This is what they do. They develop young talent and they sell it on when they want and at the level they want. And the idea that they'll just bow down and agree whatever price United or somebody else wants, it's just not how they roll. So I'm sure they will come down a bit from what they want, but they won't be in a race to get rid of him at a knockdown price, because super finisher, mega quick for a guy of his size, still has room to improve, of course, because he hasn't got a long track record as a senior pro. But you look at the impact he made coming through at Copenhagen. He did well at Sturm Graz. And since he's arrived in Serie A, he's looked really, really good. He's got some lovely touches in terms of his link-up play and bringing others into the game. So I can completely understand why United would want him. I think he's young enough for Ten Hag to work with him in terms of the outer possession stuff, because I think that would probably have to improve. But in terms of a finisher, he's definitely got those instincts in front of goal.
There is talk, isn't there, of a player swap deal, possibly part exchange. I think that the price tag is 85 million. United willing to spend 84.5 million. Anthony Martial could be a possibility.
Be a big departure from what Atalanta do, because if you look at what they do generally. Well, no, but it's interesting because a lot of people have talked about this, not just Martial, but they talked about all this kind of flotsam and jetsam that they want to get rid of. But as you guys know, I mean, Crookie, you'll know better than me, these deals, these swap deals almost never work.
No, they don't happen.
Because of the moving parts involved. But also, it's just completely out of the profile of what Atalanta normally do.
Yeah, in terms of playing as a number 9, obviously they could end up asking Marcus Rashford to do that more often than he did last season. They've just offered him a new 5-year deal. That's almost agreed in principle now. So it looks like that will happen. It will secure his future at the football club for the foreseeable future, right the way through to 2028. This is a player who, a year and a half ago, may well have been on his way out of Manchester United, but his performances last season, 30 goals and 56, certainly have re-ingratiated him to the Manchester United supporter base, who I think were getting a little bit frustrated with him a year ago.
Yeah, I think that's fair, but I'm particularly delighted that he's turned it around, because
I think everyone is.
Yeah, you look at what he did during lockdown, and actually maybe that was a negative impact on his football career. You look at just the raw talent that he's got. He's one of those players that United fans love, because when he gets the ball and he's on form, you know something is going to happen. He's got pace. He's not afraid to take people on. He takes on shots from distance. So I think his resurgence was one of the feel-good stories for me of last season. Ten Hag deserves a lot of credit for that. I'm delighted he's going to sign this new contract. For me, I still think he's a better player coming in from the left-hand side than playing as a number 9.
Which is why they want a new number 9. But when a new number 9 is going to cost £80 million and you've got someone who's scored 30 goals already in the building, it may not necessarily be, or end up being, the most important position that you have to fill.
I can understand that, because obviously you look at him and he should, in theory, have that ability to run in behind, be able to play through the middle. But I think Crookie's right. I think he is such a danger coming in off the left. And I think if they could get Hojlund, for example, a genuine centre forward for Rashford to play off, that's the dream scenario, I think, because then that gives you so much variety, so many different options. I don't quite subscribe to the idea that what Marcus Rashford did in the charitable sphere in terms of, pushing the school meals thing and all of that and all of the incredible social work he's done. I don't subscribe to the idea that was the thing that was detracting from his performances.
We've had this conversation, actually. We did it on White and Jordan on Monday, and actually, I think it's a bit more complicated than that. I think it was the attention that came with that. I think it was the scrutiny that followed, the missed penalty of the European Championships, the serious back injury that he was carrying for a very, very long time. He couldn't seem to get fit. The fact that
that's the biggest factor, isn't it? That injury, he's fit. He's fit, and he's got a really clever, good coach who believes in him.
Absolutely. Coaching didn't really help. He never nailed down a serious position in terms of what exactly was his at the time. He's been asked to do things that didn't really work. He was playing in a bad team. And also, let's be clear, he did have some personal off-the-field issues as well. And bearing in mind what we've learned over the last 6-7 days, it's probably best to factor that into our equations when judging players on a regular basis anyway. So, yeah, definitely, it's great to see him back. Let's hope he backs up what he did last season with what he does this season. We want to see him scoring goals. England want to see him scoring goals. Manchester United certainly want to see him scoring goals. Look, it's been a good week to be an Arsenal fan. There's no doubt about that. The Premier League runners-up added 2 new players, including Rice Baby. You see that video? Rice Baby, did you see that?
Yes, I did.
The AFTV one? Yeah. He got a lot of stick, but actually, do you know what? It's just a bit
of fun.
It's a bit of fun, isn't it? I thought the Laura Woods video with Adidas and Arsenal was pretty good as well, wasn't it? Just to sort of announce that he's signing. He's here and he's perfect. Is he perfect for Arsenal?
Yeah, 100%. I've been saying for 2 years, this is the player that Manchester United should have been going after. I think he's a transformative signing. I think he's already one of the best holding midfielders around. I think there's much more to come from him going forward. I think Stuart Pearce has told us that on a regular basis, that he has the ability to assist, he has the ability to score goals, to get more freedom in that Arsenal team. He's a leader, and he's going into what is still a relatively inexperienced squad, so that'll be precious. Yes, it's big money, but I think he's worth every penny. I think he's superb.
Yeah, he's not often got the ability to show his attacking dimension, Kevin, because of the way that West Ham play their football.
Yeah, and I think what Mikel Arteta clearly wants from a lot of his signings, if not all, is this versatility, this ability to play different roles, this ability for, if he goes forward, somebody else to drop in and cover him. And I do genuinely think he could be somebody that is transformative for Arsenal, because he has all of the physical attributes. He's added goals to his game. He's a leader. I think that's very, very important for Arsenal going forward, because they are still a relatively young squad. And I think all of the signings they've made so far have been really smart. And they are signings that don't just flesh out the squad. They are signings that genuinely either improve the first team or push the guys who are in that starting 11. So Arsenal are getting this absolutely right at the moment.
Well, if you go back over the course of the last year and you look at their signings, versatility is probably the biggest hallmark of all of them. If you look at Gabriel Jesus, he can play in all 3 positions along the front 3. Leandro Trossard can do the same, as well as operating as an attacking midfield player. You've got Jakob Kivior, who's got experience of playing as a centre-back, but also as a left-back and a defensive midfielder. We may not have seen as much of him last season as he would have liked, but going forward we may well do. Kai Havertz can play as a striker or in midfield. Zinchenko able to play as a left back or as a midfielder, sometimes at the same time. You've got Jurrien Timber who's coming, who can play at right back, at centre half, as a right back who inverts into midfield. So you're absolutely spot on when you talk about that versatility, and that is going to be the key to Arsenal going forward, because one of the things they will need is they'll need more players that can play in more positions. If you're not going to have a huge squad where you've got 2 players for every position, if you've got a player that can play in 3 and all of your players can do that, then you can have a smaller, tighter squad, as long as injury permits, and still manage to negotiate all the competitions that you have to try and jump over.
All of a sudden, the squad looks very deep, though, doesn't it? And I think it was an issue towards the end of last season. We've spoken on this podcast about Bukayo Saka. It was almost running on empty by the end of that campaign. But he has options now. I think you can see what they want to do with Jurrien Timber. They want to play him as a right back. Be interesting to see what that means for Ben White. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they try and use him as a midfielder, sort of John Stones hybrid type
role. Or play
role.
him in his position of centre half when
but
required.
it's difficult to get him in that centre-back
but there's
pairing when
going to
they're
be a
both
lot of
fit.
games next season for them to play.
Yeah.
He's going to have to. They're going to draw on every single member of that squad next year.
I think the one area where, for me, they're still a little bit light is that number 9 department. Obviously, Balogun, there's speculation that maybe he could be sold. He's not particularly keen to commit to a new contract, and is he quite ready to go straight into a Champions League team? Yeah, exactly. But having said that, I didn't think Arsenal necessarily would be able to match what they achieved last season. I think with the signings they've made, I do actually think that they will be a shoe-in for the top 4.
Okay, so talk to me about what you think their targets are, because Declan Rice said we've got to win the Champions League and the Premier League now. The fan base deserve it. Can they win the top prize? Can they compete for the Champions League, Kev?
I think they can. I think what's interesting about them is the journey they've been on. I was critical of Arteta and the club as a whole at one stage because I still felt that naivety was there. I still felt that, you look at that moment when they missed out on the Champions League and Spurs made it, and I'll happily hold my hand up. I got this completely wrong. I thought that was a moment where
Me too.
Tottenham would be able to really underline their position under Conte, and Arsenal would really struggle to kind of recover from that. I have to give them enormous credit for the way that not only have they bought incredibly cleverly, they've backed Arteta, and he's been able to get rid of that naivety. And yes, they didn't last the pace in the Premier League against Manchester City. Not many teams have been able to do that. And so I think it is very, very positive. So there's no reason why, even though they won't necessarily win the Champions League or the Premier League, they're now in that conversation. And they now have to talk as if they're in that conversation. It's no good now, them now going, well, as long as we make the Champions League every year, that's fine.
Yeah, Mikel
now
Arteta
it's
doesn't
got to
really
be about
do that,
thinking
though, does
bigger.
He allows you to sort of have the speculation about dreaming bigger. And one of the reasons
You
I
love
believe...
Arteta now, don't you?
I liked him at the beginning, and I went on a similar sort of arc to Simon Jordan. I really liked him. I said he's got something about him, this fella. I met him a few times. I really was impressed with the way he was. I sort of dipped over the COVID period where things weren't particularly right.
You weren't sure on the process, were you, at that stage?
I wasn't sure on the process. I couldn't see the process. But ultimately, the end of last year, beginning of this year, I think he's been absolutely terrific. I honestly do, and I do like him a lot. I like him as a bloke. I like him the way he talks. He interviews brilliantly. He expresses his ideas articulately. I think his recruitment's been superb, and they are a fine example, Edu and Arteta, of how the relationship of a sporting director and a manager should work, because they are almost symbiotic. They work together, which is incredibly important if you want a harmonious football club.
Do you know my issue with it? Just very quickly. Right, I grew up on the Arsenal-Manchester United rivalry. I'm not supposed to like Arsenal players.
Yeah.
I find this Arsenal team quite a likeable bunch of individuals.
But that's because you're mates with Aaron Ramsdale.
That does help.
And he tells you about, oh, yeah, my mate Willie, who plays in front of me, he's great, he's fantastic. And, me and Deck, we're doing this now. Do you want to come for a round of golf, Crook? Where do you think they'll finish? You said they're going to be shooing for a top 4.
Yeah, I think, again, they might well be Manchester City's nearest challengers.
Okay, right. So Manchester City and Arsenal in the top 4. Where are Liverpool going to finish?
I think they'll get top 4 as well.
Manchester United?
Top 4.
Okay, Chelsea?
I love Pochettino, but they've got so much work to do on that
Tottenham?
squad. Again, I think Postecoglou is a good manager. I could see them finishing 5th, potentially,
Okay,
ahead of Chelsea.
Newcastle?
I think they'll have a dip. 8th.
Arsenal? Aston Villa?
7th.
Brighton?
10th.
Right, okay. All right, so you've already picked his predictions for the season. Make sure we clip that up and play that back to you when Arsenal are fighting for a top half.
I was going to say, I'm going to let him do that. I'm not getting involved in any of that.
Far
at this
too
stage.
early to start thinking about
What,
that.
we mid-July?
Yeah, I know,
no,
but
no,
anything
no.
to stitch him up is the most important thing that we do on a day-to-day
My mates
basis.
at Brighton are not going to be happy with 10th, are they?
No, we'll tell them about it, don't worry. Across North London, Daniel Levy, is he starting to cave under pressure from Bayern Munich? And are they going to lose Harry Kane to the Bundesliga? Well, over the weekend, it was really interesting, Kev, because Uli Hoeneß was pretty strident, just telling everyone. He just picked up his megaphone and started shouting about the fact, yeah, I've been chatting to Kane, everything's great. He wants to come over, have a few glasses of wine and sign on the dotted line. He loves it here. And Rummenigge, yeah, he speaks to him every week. He's fantastic. Could you just explain to us whether or not Hoeneß has any real influence, and has he done this before?
He's done this many times before. Does he have real influence? Yes. And it was interesting. He was moved to this role of honorary president And really, he was still one of the strongest voices in the room. He's kind of like the Father Jack of Bayern Munich in the sense that when Mrs. Doyle isn't keeping an eye on him and isn't wheeling him out of the room at the right moment, he will embarrass people. He will just scream out things he wasn't supposed to. At the start of that interview, he said, I'm not going to talk about transfers. Don't ask me about transfers. And by the end of the interview, he'd said everything about the chase for Harry Kane. I think what it does do is it underlines this idea that Bayern have that Kane is keen to join them. And they wouldn't be making multiple bids and they wouldn't be spending this much energy on chasing him if they hadn't been given that indication.
Yeah, but are they time wasting here? Because ultimately, he may have indicated that he wants to go, but he only goes if they pay the price. And I can tell you the price right now. I know what it is. It's 120 million euros minimum. If they do that, they will get him. If they don't, they won't.
But I think Bayern are waiting for a situation where Daniel Levy's going to have to pick his poison, because he either lets him go for a bit lower than that, or he runs the risk of not convincing him to sign a new deal and then potentially loses him to a Premier League rival in a year's time for absolutely nothing.
They will wait until the point where he thinks, right, if I don't sell him to Bayern Munich for 100 million euros right now, then I'm going to get nothing next year. And if he tries to force for a move and I lose him in a couple of weeks' time for 110, for example, then I'm not going to be able to replace him. So it's sort of like that key sort of negotiating strategy. And I spoke to Crook about this. He said to me earlier in the day, it needs to be done quickly because Tottenham need to think about getting a replacement. And I said, look, here's the truth. It ain't going to be quick. This is going to go on for a little while yet, because these are two negotiators that have been doing this since 2010 or whatever, in Levy's, longer than that, 20 years they've been doing it, these people. They know exactly how to eke out a negotiation. They're two experts in the field. Even Hoeneß referenced that during his interview, actually, saying that he wasn't dealing with a new kid on the block here. He was dealing with someone who knew exactly what he was doing. And I think as a result of that, they will play this game of poker for as long as possible until someone decides to blink.
I think Levy's stubborn enough to let it go until the end of the window, keep Kane and risk losing him on a free transfer next summer. I really think he's stubborn enough to do that.
Well, what if you're Joe Lewis, right, and you're thinking that there's a possibility that in the not too distant future you might want to find a way of checking out, right? Because ultimately the reason that Erik bought the club was eventually to allow the asset to appreciate and then check out eventually and take the money. They're certainly going to do that at some point in the future, and they're not just doing it for the love.
There's been talks about it, isn't there?
There has indeed, behind the scenes. And I wonder whether or not, bearing in mind that is a situation that they're in financially, whether or not he would allow Daniel Levy to continue this game of brinkmanship to the point where Harry Kane, their biggest asset, leaves on a free transfer.
It's a fascinating situation. And they've offered him huge money, haven't they, to sign this new contract with the extra carrot of a potential future coaching role. What I think is interesting about this summer, it feels very different to a couple of years ago when Manchester City were in for him. He gave that interview to Gary Neville, basically said he wanted to leave Tottenham, wanted to win trophies, went AWOL for the start of pre-season training. He's playing it by the book this time. He hasn't come out and said he wants to leave. He reported back with a smile on his face for the first day of training. He's gone to Australia. He's making the effort with Ange Postecoglou. Now, that could all be because he wants to go out and be seen as a nice guy, or it could be because he's genuinely torn about what he wants to do.
I thought it was really interesting when we heard from Ange Postecoglou when he said, whilst he is here, he will continue to give his all for us, which is interesting, I thought. Right, let's move on to our countdown to the new season and chat about two teams hoping to build on impressive campaigns, Fulham and Brighton. Should we start with Fulham? Fancy starting with Fulham? You want to start with Fulham? Yeah, why not? Brilliant season last time out. But they head into this campaign with a few more questions because Alexander Mitrovic wants out. He wants to go to Saudi Arabia, and there's not a direct replacement been sorted as of yet. Marco Silva, uncertain future. He's the manager and he's done a very good job. And João Palhinha is subject of interest of West Ham United as well. Someone did suggest today that £40 million, which was the reported figure for João Palhinha, would probably just get his right leg.
I think you might be surprised about that.
Why? Is there a clause?
Well, I was told there was a clause. Obviously, the Fulham owner has come out and said there isn't a clause.
But sometimes when the Fulham owner says it's not a clause, it doesn't mean there isn't a clause.
No.
It just means he doesn't want you to know about the clause.
Well, I was told yesterday that the bidding will start at £40 million. I think West Ham realise they're going to have to pay a little bit more, but they don't believe it will be significantly more for Paulinho. So let's see where that goes.
That's a good transfer if they can get that over the line.
I'm surprised one or two bigger clubs are not looking
Me
at
too.
that. You know, a Liverpool,
Chelsea
who need midfield reinforcements. But it's a concern for Fulham for the reasons you've just mentioned. If they do lose Paulinho and they lose Mitrovic, I think they're in for a very different season to the one they had last season. Looks like Willian, having had a bit of interest from Nottingham Forest, is eventually going to sign a new contract, but they've lost Manor Solomon as well. I think Tosin Adarabioyo,
he wants a new
is subject of interest from elsewhere.
I was going to say he wants a new career path, doesn't he? He doesn't fancy sitting around and competing for his place. He wants to play football regularly.
Yeah, and if you look at their success last season, Paulinho, Mitrovic and Tosin were the three real key components. If they were to lose even two of those three, I think it's going to be a difficult season.
I think was a big part of that as well.
Yeah.
I think he was terrific. In terms of the idea of losing Mitrovic, is there anybody who could sort of fulfil his profile on the continent? Kevin?
Yeah, I think there are players they would look at, but it's really interesting. Just to go to that Paulinho thing really, really quickly. I think if there is a clause around about that level of finance, you mentioned about bigger clubs not coming in for him yet. I think if that does become clear to everyone that that's the level that you could get to, I'd be gobsmacked if other clubs don't come in. And one of them could be Bayern, because even though they've said recently that Konrad Laimer, who's coming from Leipzig, could play in that position, it wouldn't surprise me necessarily to see them go for somebody like Paulinho, because they want somebody who's a bit of a destroyer. They want somebody who can really tidy up in front of that back line. So I think he would probably fit that quite nicely. In terms of potential strikers, the difficulty is there are prolific strikers around the leagues. And you look at guys who've come from the Bundesliga recently, guys like Taiwo Awoniyi, which is the kind of profile that Fulham might look at, has been a success going, across to Forest. So I think they might look in the Bundesliga. It's interesting, somebody like Andre Silva, for example, hasn't quite worked out at Leipzig, but scored a ton of goals for Frankfurt a few years ago, has shown at international level that he can score goals. So there might be somebody like him that you could pick up that just needs a bit of a reset, has just slowed down a bit, but still has great quality. But Paulinho, for me, with massive respect to West Ham, if they get him, that's a major coup, because I think that's a Champions League midfielder right there.
Well, he is. He's played in the Champions League before, isn't he? I mean, he's a superb midfield player. He was a brilliant acquisition from Fulham. Whoever did the recruitment there did an excellent job to get him for the kind of price that they paid for him. And listen, he's played one season there. He's done brilliant work. He's settled into the Premier League serenely. He's definitely going to be on somebody else's radar. Watch this space with him, because I'm not entirely sure that saga is over yet. Brighton, McAllister gone. Caicedo likely to be going or not? Don't rule out that he stays.
Yeah, I understand why you're saying that. I still think he will move, but it won't be for much less than £100 million. That's the price tag.
Well, when you look at these two players that we're just talking about, Paulinho and Caicedo, right? Okay, they're different types of profile of players, but they do some of the similar jobs, that they're great at winning the ball. Maybe Caicedo is slightly better athletically getting up and down the park and can play in a number of different positions. But in terms of price differential, if you were going to go for one or two of them, depending on your cash restrictions, you might then turn and pivot towards Paulinho if you were going to go for Caicedo, because it's going to cost you £50 million more.
Yeah, I think Caicedo possibly has the possibility to grow into a player who offers you a bit more going forward than Paulinho.
He's 21.
So that you're paying for potential there. But I understand where you're coming from. I still think he ends up at Chelsea. I think Chelsea almost have to get this deal done. They're so light in midfield. We know how much of an admirer Pochettino is of his. And there is precedent there when it came to Enzo Fernandez. They said they wouldn't pay the big money. They did pay the big money. So I think that is still the likely outcome. But as we sit here on Monday, Brighton are due to jet off to the United States very shortly. He's going to be part of that tour. He could well end up playing against Chelsea for Brighton in Philadelphia.
Levi Colwill is another player that is on Brighton's radar, and it also links Brighton and Chelsea because Chelsea want him to stay and be a part of their first team squad next season. But he thinks he can play week in, week out for Roberto De Zerbi, although he didn't do that, did he, last season? In fact, at one stage, he couldn't play 2 games in a week, which was something that De Zerbi flagged up and discussed with me in a tunnel after the Newcastle game. So that is something that he'll have to improve on in order to be able to compete for a place in the Premier League week in, week out. But should Chelsea be trying to keep hold of him, Kev?
I think so. I think there's clear talent there. And what I think is really interesting is it's that ability on the ball. I mean, those centre-backs for De Zerbi are very, very important because he's always trying to generate those artificial counter-attacks, if you like, because he draws the opposition onto you. That then takes quite, nerves of steel, really, for a defender, because you're basically getting rid of the ball at the last moment to draw the team onto you. So a player that can cope with that, I think, is a valuable asset. Liverpool have been linked with him a lot, it seems. He's clearly a rising star. And I can understand why, as you say, because of the physical work he has to do, he can't necessarily play that punishing schedule at the moment, but he's still got a lot of room to develop. But you look across at Chelsea and think, I do think Chelsea have a reputational problem in the sense that is it a lot of young players going there, but are you going to play? Are you going to play every week? And are you going to damage your career by being there?
Well, this is the problem. I've ranted about this a lot. I mean, the idea that you get all these players coming through your academy, you do such a good job to produce them, and then you discard them or allow them to leave or don't value them so that they end up wanting to leave. It's absolute nuts. It's a waste of time and energy and money. Why did you bother having an academy? There's absolutely no reason to have one. People will say, well, you've made some money out of it. Well, probably a bit. But ultimately, the idea of having a good academy and bringing out the best of talent is being able to generate those players that can have the club at heart. There's so much more to it than just the football side of it as well. And I just think, you save so much money if you get someone who comes through the academy and graduates into your first team and becomes the poster boy for your team. Reece James, obviously, one of those, fantastic. Conor Gallagher, maybe not necessarily at the same level as a Mount or even technically as a Ruben Loftus-Cheek, but still a very, very good player and can do Chelsea a job. But at this moment in time, he'll have to because there's nobody else apart from him and Enzo Fernandez who can play in the centre of midfield. But the idea of getting rid of Colwill now seems stupid. You've got to convince this guy that he's a part of the club for the future. He could potentially be a future Chelsea captain. Come on, play in our team every week instead of going off and playing somewhere else. The issue is again, they farmed him out so often. They haven't dealt with him maybe necessarily in the right way. He's attracted by the prospect of playing with Roberto De Zerbi. He knows he's going to play week in, week out. He knows he's going to be forgiven for mistakes that he makes during his time down at Brighton. And he probably sees that actually he can play in Europe with Brighton and not with Chelsea.
It's a really good point. But I'm intrigued to see how Brighton balance that because De Zerbi was quite public at the end of last season in the changing room after they qualified for the Europa League. He said to the owner, Tony Bloom, well, we need some more players now. They've started all right. They've got James Milner in. They've got Dahoud in, who Kev will tell us about what he will bring. Yeah. They've got João Pedro in a club record deal. But I think they still need a little bit more.
They've got a new goalkeeper as well, haven't they? Bart Verbruggen, who Kev's a big fan of.
Yeah, I like him. I think there's a real kind of gravitas about him for a player so young. Somebody who went into the Anderlecht first team and played very well. And somebody who I think is going to Brighton to compete. I don't think he's necessarily going there to just accept being Steele's backup. I think he'll want to fight for that first team spot. I think the key with him as well is he can play. He's good with the ball at his feet, and you have to be a Brighton goalkeeper. That's what De Zerbi demands. That's why they've brought him in. So I think there's potentially a very exciting player there. Leipzig were really strongly linked with him to bring him in as their number 2, but he would have probably been the number 1 to start with because
Manchester United looked at him as
been
well.
Out long term.
United had a good look at him.
I think he wants to play. I think he does want to play. So I'll be interested to see if Steele starts as the number 1, how long it is before Verbruggen is knocking on that door. Just in terms of Dahoud, he's a lovely footballer to watch. I can completely understand why they've gone for him, because he's technically gifted. He looks after the ball really well. At Dortmund, he had a few injury issues here and there, and he had spells where he was a big part of that first team, but wasn't quite able to maintain it. But when I look at what they've done with Pascal Gross, if they could do that with him, they could do that with Dahoud, because Gross was a good player in the Bundesliga, had flashes of inspiration, has become a genuine Premier League performer. So I think that's pretty exciting as well. And João Pedro, I've seen him live a few times, and every time I've seen him, he's been the best player on the pitch by such a distance. It was actually quite scary. That kid's unbelievable.
Yep, he's going to be a good acquisition, I think. The other thing about Dahoud is he's brilliant for social media. Tell me that when they unveiled him, they said, "Guess who's in Dahoud?" Had to do that, didn't they?
I'm not sure they did, actually, but they did do the Simpsons introduction, didn't they, for Bart?
They did.
Which was very good.
They did, very good. Kev, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We enjoyed it once again, and we'll see you again soon. We'll be back next Monday. That's it from us. Remember, we're on every single Monday throughout the summer with the latest transfer news, managerial changes and previews to the new season ahead of our new podcast, which is coming out in the new season. We look forward to it.